So, hi, church family. Good to be with you again. I love sharing these interviews. I've enjoyed finding more out about some of the fantastic people in HCC, and we've got one here today with us, Mr. Richard Morris.
Hi, everyone.
It's good to be with you, Rich. Rich is an OG HCC member. Goes right back to the beginning, I think, almost, don't you?
Yeah, right to the beginning, actually, yeah.
Yeah, and you've stuck it out, so good job. Well done. You'll get your gold watch or something when you go to eternity. So, Rich, so just tell us a little bit about you and a bit of your sort of faith journey.
Okay, then. Yeah, so I'm a local to this area. I was born in Swindon, and we moved out to Blunsdon, where I now live, when I was 2. So basically, I grew up in Blunsdon. Obviously went to school and that locally. Basically had a pretty ordinary, pretty kind of happy childhood. When I was 16, one of my school friends who
were you at Warnford?
I was at Warnford, yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Where we meet for church on Sundays.
Yeah.
Before lockdown.
Right. One of my school friends invited me to his baptism, and I'd never ever come across a sort of adult baptism at all at that point. I think if you'd asked me if I believed there was a God, I would probably have said yes, but there was nothing kind of personal about that, and I wasn't a regular churchgoer or anything. I'd occasionally go to church in Blunsdon for things like Christmas services, and because I was involved in the Cubs and Scouts, and they would have parade services and stuff like that, so I wasn't totally unfamiliar with church, but I never went regularly. And actually, when this friend asked me, I wasn't that interested, to be perfectly honest. I only really went in the end because he just kept pestering me.
Come on.
And so I went along to his baptism service, which was at Gorshill Baptist Church. And I just remember, I just remember meeting God there, really. The place was absolutely packed out. But there were 2 things in particular that really spoke to me. One was the preacher, who was a really godly old man called David Walker, who one or 2 people might remember. And I remember him talking about crossroads and coming to crossroads in your life and deciding which way you had to choose which way to go.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't so much what he said as the fact that there, among all of those people, I just felt like he was talking directly to me. And the other thing that I remember really impacting me was just the testimony of my friend and the other people being baptized. Again, it wasn't so much what he said, although I do remember there was one young girl there who had a particularly powerful testimony. I think had tried to take her own life after flunking her A-levels and things like that, and had found Jesus and obviously turned her life around. So there was some very powerful testimony, but again, it wasn't so much what people said as the fact that it was just very apparent that what they were saying was coming from deep within them, that it was real.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something that was just on the surface. So as a result of that, I started going along to the little youth group that was called the not very imaginatively named Sunday night group, which was the kind of precursor to HCC, which, as the name suggests, just ran on a Sunday evening in Phil Holmes, it was at the time's house. And I don't remember specifically at that time like praying the prayer, if you like, but I just began to get to know God, and God became real to me. A few months later, I got baptized, I got filled with the Spirit, and it was an amazing time, actually. And then it was it was out of that small youth group and through the leadership of then, as I say, Phil Holmes and Phil Baker and another Derek Duffett that the HCC actually started. So as you say, I've been around from the beginning. I went off to uni, and I actually had a pretty difficult time towards the end of my years at uni. I got involved in a little church group that turned out to be a bit of a cult, really, and I got a bit
Okay.
a bit young and naive, and I got a bit sucked in, and
Just quickly, Rich, what do you sort of like mean by that? Because I mean, what's the difference between, in a sense, a good bunch of Christians are going after Jesus and when it gets a bit off?
I think that's quite difficult to define, because in one sense, on one level, I think that description you just gave, a good bunch of Christians going after Jesus, there was a lot about them of which you could have said that was true, but I think there was a lot about them that was just, when I look back now, that wasn't particularly scripturally based, and I think they were very selective and slanted in the way they use scripture, and in particular, they were very into spiritual warfare, and at first that was kind of very exciting, and I'm certainly not against that kind of stuff per se, but I think there was such an emphasis on that it began. After a time, it felt to me that actually, when it came to the crunch, they were almost more interested in what the devil was doing than what God was doing.
Yeah.
And but I think, like, for me, the problem was that I was, I said I was quite young still. I was quite naive, I think, and I got sort of sucked into a point that it was very, very difficult to actually then to extricate myself from that sort of situation. And I think that that had a very profound effect on me going forward. From there, I think I didn't lose my faith, certainly, but faith certainly became a lot more difficult. And I think just as an example of how tough that time was, it was probably 10 years before I could seriously talk about that to anybody.
Yes.
How profound it had. And I think, if I'm honest, I'm still working through stuff, trying to work through stuff, today that goes back that time, although, there certainly have been significant periods over the years where I do feel I've been able to take, big steps forward. I did go and get some counselling at the Willows, and I've been to ministry things, Hill and stuff like that, which have all been very helpful. And more recently, I've just started to look at one or two things again with people from the prayer ministry team here again, and so which again has been really helpful. So I wouldn't say it's been an easy journey after those initial years, those initial couple of years which were tremendously exciting. But one of the things that I found particularly encouraging with where HCC is at the moment is that although we look very different from how we were in those very early days when the church started, I do think that it feels to me anyway like there's something of that same spirit now that there was right at the beginning. That there's that real excitement, that real kind of passion for God, which is what the church was really birthed from, I think. And so, like I said, although things look very different, I think it's great to sort of see that, see that there again. Which, that's brilliant.
Fantastic. And you've done a bit of travel the last few years, which on paper isn't something that probably you or people knowing some of the challenges you've been through what would have happened. So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. I mean, I do like travelling generally, just even in just a holiday kind of sense, but obviously, particularly in the last few years, I've been over to Moldova a couple of times, and I went to Costa Rica. And I found all of those trips just fantastic, really, on all sorts of levels. I think, just on a very human level, just experiencing different cultures, seeing different places. But I think particularly if you do it in a mission trip, you're doing it in the context of kind of, if you like, real people that are living there, not in a holiday context. And so you see the places in a very different light. I think it's just amazing that you realise you have such a commonality in terms of your faith. You might have different languages, you might struggle to communicate and things like that, but actually you have the same faith and the same God, and that's amazing. And I mean, one of the things that I particularly remember, for example, from the Moldova trip, from both Moldova trips, is just that you're worshipping with people in a different language, but it actually doesn't matter, you're just still worshipping the same God and connecting to the same God. The other thing I think I think perhaps particularly from my trip to Costa Rica, is that I was over there for 3 weeks. You kind of go over there. I didn't, the language thing with Costa Rica was probably a bigger thing for me than with Moldova, because with Moldova both times you've been with big groups, so at least you've got a lot of English people around you that you can still talk to. But with Costa Rica, the language thing was probably bigger, because English people there, I essentially sort of went over on my own. And to be honest, you go there for 3 weeks, you muck in with things where you can, but in the overall scheme of things, you don't really actually objectively contribute that much. But I think you seem to carry a blessing that goes way beyond that. People, I just felt that people were so pleased that I just made the effort to go and be with them and stand with them, and that in a way that went far beyond what you would consider just normal hospitality and politeness. And so I think, I think we shouldn't underestimate the blessing that we can bring. Obviously it's great to go and do stuff and to do practical things and that as well, but just actually the blessing we take by just going and being and saying.
Yeah, that's good.
That was excellent. Yeah.
Good, Richard. So in a moment, Rich is just going to share just a little bit of encouragement you've got. But just to say to people, what Richard touched on earlier about what happened at university, I think getting hurt or getting confused in a Christian and a church context is one of the hardest things. And I think, like Rich is saying, hey, make sure if that's happened to you, do your due diligence, talk to people, if you can, maybe get some prayer ministry or counselling, but even just talking about it and letting God process it, because that's one of the most difficult and confusing things to happen, and we don't want anybody walking forward with any baggage. So Rich, what do you want to share with everybody?
Okay, so I just wanted to share a couple of psalms really that have blessed me during this sort of lockdown period. One is Psalm 46, which I think other people have mentioned, but it very obviously talks about God's kind of protection, which obviously is great in the kind of times we've been in. But the other thing that I particularly liked about it was that it talks actually about joy as well. So it's not just about kind of hunkering down and getting through, but that God, talks about rivers of joy in the midst of everything that's going on. And the second one was Psalm 16, and that talks about quite a few things. It talks about taking delight in each other as God's people, which I think is great, the way that we've been able to continue to do that despite the challenges of not being able to see each other face to face very much. It talks about things like God having given us a pleasant inheritance, But perhaps the thing that struck me most of all, again, in the context of the current situation, it just talks about keeping our eyes on Jesus and God being always before us. So it's okay, I'll just read those if that's all right, Matt.
Go on.
Yeah, okay, so Psalm 46, I probably won't read all of this one, but it says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And just a bit later, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And then Psalm 16. It says, keep me safe, O God, for in you I take refuge. I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. Apart from you, I have no good thing. As for the saints who are in the land, they are the glorious ones in whom is all my delight. But the sorrows of those will increase who run after other gods. I will not pour out their libations of blood or take up their names on my lips. Lord, you have assigned me my portion and my cup. You have made my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night my heart instructs me. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the grave, nor will you let your Holy One see decay. You have made known to me the path of life, and will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand.
Brilliant, Rich. Well, great to see you. Thank you so much. And just God bless you guys today.
I know I will never be alone.
Right. See you all.
There was another in the fire, standing next to me.